All right, welcome back everyone to the deep dive. We're diving into something I think everyone listening can relate to, um, conflict
Yeah, for sure.
in relationships.
Yeah.
And, I think we all wish it would just go away,
Right.
that we could just live in this world of perfect harmony and never have to disagree. But let's be honest, is anyone out there actually living that?
Not that I've ever seen, no.
No, just not realistic. Unless you are with someone who never talks,
A very quiet partner, yeah.
right? But then, that's a whole other set of issues. So we're kind of stuck with arguments. They're just part of the deal when you're in a relationship with another human being. But the real question, the thing we really want to get into today is how to do those arguments. Because it turns out it's not about if you fight, it's about how you fight. That actually makes all the difference.
Absolutely. It's that moment when you feel that tension building, maybe your heart starts to race a little bit, That's where this deep dive comes in. We want to help you move past those frustrating clashes and find a way to actually grow closer through those difficult conversations. It's about turning what can feel like a battle into a real opportunity, an opportunity to understand each other better and come out of it with a stronger connection.
That's a really good point. It's not about avoiding conflict altogether, but we're going to get into that a little bit later. But first, I want to lay out what we've got in store for you today. We've actually pulled together some really fascinating information, stuff that really challenges the way we typically think about conflict. We're going to look at why conflict actually isn't the relationship killer we often think it is. We're going to show you how to spot those behaviors that can truly damage a connection. And most importantly, we'll give you some really effective strategies. And these are grounded in some serious research, the kind of work coming out of the Gottman Institute, studies from UT, Harvard, some really solid stuff.
What's really interesting here, and something we want to highlight for you, is how we're often taught to see conflict as just this inherently negative thing, something to be avoided at all costs, right?
Yeah.
But the mission of this deep dive is to challenge that assumption. We want to explore how engaging with disagreements, but doing it constructively, can actually be a really powerful force for good in your relationships.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people are probably familiar with that myth that happy couples never fight.
Oh, yeah. That's a classic.
Right. Like if you're arguing, it means something's fundamentally wrong with the relationship.
Right, right. And it's easy to fall into that trap, right? Because you think, oh, if we're disagreeing, it must mean we're not meant to be. But the research, especially the extensive work from the Gottman Institute, paints a very different picture.
It's interesting, right? Because you would think that the absence of conflict would be the defining feature of a strong relationship. But it turns out it's actually how those conflicts are managed that really matters. In fact, completely avoiding arguments that can actually be detrimental to the relationship. Think about it. For you, the listener, it leads to all these suppressed emotions, all that resentment just building up under the surface.
Yeah, it's like trying to hold a beach ball underwater.
Exactly.
You can push it down for so long, but eventually
It got pop up.
it's going to explode.
Yeah.
And some of our sources even point out that some of the strongest, the most resilient relationships actually involve, get this, passionate disagreements.
That's right.
So it's not about not fighting, it's about fighting well. What are some of the things that actually make conflict constructive, something that actually benefits the relationship? That's the key question, right? So when you approach conflict with emotional intelligence, it's almost like you're shining a spotlight on deeper issues. The stuff that might be hiding beneath those surface level disagreements. It helps you see the root cause of what you're actually arguing about.
Yeah. Like, give me an example of that.
So let's say you're having this seemingly simple argument about, why didn't you text me back? On the surface, it's about the text. But if you dig a little deeper, it might actually be about feeling unimportant or neglected.
Right?
And for you, the listener, identifying those core feelings is what allows you to actually move toward a resolution.
That makes perfect sense. It's like the symptom isn't the disease, right? You've got to look deeper.
Yeah.
So beyond just uncovering those deeper issues, how else can navigating conflict in a healthy way actually be a good thing for the relationship?
Well, think about it. When you and your partner successfully work through a challenge together, when you navigate those inevitable bumps in the road as a team, that builds a huge amount of trust and intimacy. And for you individually, it's also a fantastic opportunity to sharpen your communication skills. Because let's be honest, who couldn't use a little help in that department?
Everyone.
Right.
Like, absolutely.
Learning to clearly articulate your emotions, truly listening to your partner's perspective, Those are skills that benefit you not just in your romantic relationships, but really in every area of your life.
So we're establishing here that conflict itself isn't necessarily a bad thing.
Right.
But there are definitely some things, some behaviors that can really derail things when disagreements do arise. So let's dive into some of those.
Yeah, let's get into the nitty-gritty.
What are some of the worst conflict mistakes that couples make?
Okay, so the first one, and I think this is something we've all experienced at some point, either on the giving or receiving end, is the dreaded silent treatment.
Right.
You know, that moment when you just shut down, withdraw from the interaction. It might feel good in the heat of the moment, like a way to regain control or avoid saying something you'll regret. But the research, it paints a pretty concerning picture here. Psychologists call this stonewalling, and it's essentially one partner completely shutting down emotionally. What's really important for you, the listener, to understand is the long-term impact of this behavior. That study from UT, it found a direct correlation between frequent use of the silent treatment and increased emotional dissatisfaction and stress levels in the relationship. And that's for both people involved.
It makes sense. It just creates this wall between you. You feel completely shut out, ignored. So what's a better way to handle those moments when you're feeling overwhelmed and you just need a little space?
The key is to communicate your need for space without completely shutting down the conversation. Our sources suggest using a simple phrase like, I need a few minutes to cool down, but let's talk about this later. That way, you're acknowledging your need for a break while also reassuring your partner that you're not abandoning the conversation altogether. It's about regulating your own emotions without disconnecting from the relationship.
Okay, so much better than just disappearing into silence.
Much healthier. Yeah.
Right. Okay, let's talk about another one that can really send things off the rails.
Yep.
Name calling and personal attacks.
Yeah. This one's a big one.
Right. We all know how quickly things can escalate when those insults start flying.
Unfortunately, it's a really common pattern. And the reason it's so damaging is because it completely shifts the focus of the conflict. Instead of addressing the actual issue, you're attacking your partner's character.
Right.
And John Gottman, who's done extensive research on this, he found that contempt, which includes name-calling and those dismissive superior remarks, is actually one of the biggest predictors of divorce.
Wow.
It just erodes the respect between you and makes it almost impossible to find any common ground.
And once those words are out there, it's really hard to take them back.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Mm.
So our source gives this really helpful example. Instead of saying something like, you're just like your mother, which is just,
Ah, that's a low blow.
attacking their character, focus on the specific behavior and how it made you feel. Like, I felt hurt when you didn't consult me about that decision. What's the difference there?
It's a huge difference. That first statement, that's just pure attack. It's blaming. It's judgmental. But the second one, it focuses on your own emotional experience in response to a specific action.
So I statements are really important here.
They're incredibly powerful because when you start a sentence with you, it automatically puts the other person on the defensive. They feel attacked and are more likely to attack back. But when you use I statements, you're expressing your own reality without blaming them. It invites empathy and understanding rather than defensiveness.
So it's not about pointing fingers. It's about expressing how you feel. Okay, let's talk about one more of these worst mistakes, and I think a lot of couples fall into this trap, which is keeping score.
Ah, yes, the relationship ledger.
Right, this mental tally of past wrongdoings that somehow always gets dragged out every time you have a new argument. Does that sound familiar to anyone out there?
It's a heavy book to carry, that's for sure, and it doesn't do anyone any good. The problem with constantly bringing up past mistakes is that it prevents you from actually resolving the current issue. You're basically turning every conflict into a trial, with all these past offenses being used as evidence. And the research is pretty clear on this. Resentment builds up much faster than forgiveness. Holding onto those grudges just creates these emotional barriers that make it harder and harder to move forward together.
So it's like you're not even present in the current argument because you're so focused on this laundry list of past grievances. So the advice here, and I think this is really important for you, the listener, is to address issues as they arise. And once they're resolved, really make an effort to let them go. I know it's easier said than done, but it's essential for a healthy relationship.
It definitely takes effort from both people to forgive and move on. And look, if the same issue keeps coming up over and over again, that might be a sign that it wasn't truly resolved the first time.
Okay.
And that requires a different kind of conversation. But if you're constantly weaponizing past mistakes in your current arguments, That's a recipe for unhappiness.
Okay, so we've talked about what not to do. Now let's get into some of the good stuff, some effective conflict resolution techniques that you can actually use.
Let's give people some tools to work with.
Right, so the first one we want to talk about is the 5-to-1 ratio.
Oh, this is a good one.
What is this all about?
This comes from the Gottman Institute, and it's based on their extensive research on what makes relationships thrive. The basic idea is that for a relationship to be stable and happy, there needs to be a balance between positive and negative interactions. Specifically, they found that for every one negative interaction during a conflict, you need about 5 positive interactions to counteract it.
5-to-1. That seems like a lot.
It might sound like a lot, but it's actually more doable than you think. These positive interactions don't have to be these grand gestures. It can be small things, like a shared laugh, a compliment, offering to help with something, even just a loving touch. The main takeaway for you, the listener, is to make sure your relationship isn't dominated by negativity. So let's say you have a tense conversation about finances. Afterwards, you consciously make an effort to weave in some positive experiences, like a fun date night or a heart-to-heart conversation where you both feel really connected.
Okay, so it's not about avoiding conflict altogether. It's about building a foundation of positive experiences that can help you weather those storms when they inevitably come up.
Exactly. You're building up that resilience.
All right, next up we have the 20-minute rule. I'm intrigued by this one. Tell me about this.
This one's interesting because it's rooted in our physiology or actual biology. Neuroscience has shown that when we get really emotionally overwhelmed during an argument, it's like our brain gets hijacked.
Hijack, that's a good word for it.
We literally lose our ability to think clearly. There's this study that showed that when your heart rate goes above 100 beats per minute, your cognitive function takes a nosedive.
Oh, wow.
You're basically running on pure emotion, and at that point, productive problem solving becomes impossible. You're more likely to say things you'll regret or misinterpret what your partner is saying. So the 20-minute rule suggests taking a deliberate break when things start to get too heated.
So you're basically hitting the pause button before things go completely off the rails.
Exactly. And the key here is to agree on this beforehand, so it doesn't feel like one person is just shutting down the conversation. You both agree that if things get too intense, you'll take a 20-minute break to calm down, let your heart rate settle, and then come back to the discussion when you can think more clearly.
That makes so much sense. Okay, the next technique we want to talk about is active listening. It sounds simple enough, but I think in the middle of an argument, it can be really difficult to do.
It's definitely a skill. It takes practice. Because our natural instinct when we hear something we disagree with is to jump in with our own rebuttal, right? We're already formulating our response before the other person has even finished talking.
I'm so guilty of that.
But active listening, it requires you to resist that urge and really focus on understanding your partner's perspective. You're listening not just to respond, but to understand.
And our source gives this great example, reflecting back what you're hearing.
Yeah.
So let's say your partner says, I feel like you don't prioritize me when you work late. An active listening response would be, so you're feeling like I don't prioritize you when I work late. What's so powerful about that seemingly simple reflection?
It shows your partner that you're actually listening, that you're making an effort to understand their feelings and their point of view. It validates their experience, even if you don't agree with their interpretation. There was this Harvard study that found couples who practice active listening report higher levels of satisfaction and emotional connection.
Makes sense.
It really fosters a sense of being heard and understood, which is so important for resolving conflict constructively.
It's like saying, I'm putting aside my own thoughts for a moment to really hear what you're saying. Okay, the last technique we want to touch on, we mentioned this earlier, but it's worth repeating because it's so effective, is using I statements.
Yes, I statements are crucial.
Why are they so important?
The main principle behind I statements is to shift the focus away from blame and onto your own feelings and experiences. So instead of saying something like, you never support me, which is an accusation, you say, I feel unsupported when you don't ask about my day.
That's so much better.
It's a small shift in phrasing, but it can make a world of difference. When you start a sentence with you, it puts the other person on the defensive. They feel attacked and are more likely to respond defensively. I statements, on the other hand, express your own emotional reality without blaming the other person, which makes it much easier for them to empathize with you and less likely to get defensive.
It's about owning your own feelings.
Exactly.
Okay, our source throws in this interesting, maybe even a little controversial idea here, suggesting that some couples might actually need to fight more.
It does sound a little counterintuitive, especially after everything we've been talking about, right?
Yeah. But I think it makes sense when you think about it.
The point is that the complete absence of conflict isn't always a sign of a healthy relationship. It can actually mean that one or both partners are avoiding difficult conversations, suppressing their own needs and feelings in order to keep the peace. And as the research suggests, that kind of avoidance can lead to lower satisfaction in the long run compared to couples who address their issues head on.
So, too much conflict is obviously not a good thing.
Of course not.
But avoiding it completely can be just as problematic because those unaddressed issues just fester and eventually erupt in a much bigger way.
Exactly. It's like a pressure cooker.
So if you're in a relationship where things seem a little too smooth, you might want to ask yourselves, are we really being honest with each other? Are we sweeping important things under the rug?
It's worth reflecting on that.
Okay, so we've talked about how to navigate the fight itself, but what happens after the argument, that's just as important, right?
Oh, absolutely. That's where the real healing and reconnection happens.
So let's talk about that. Post-conflict repair, what does that involve?
The first step is a genuine apology. And this isn't just a quick mumbled sorry. It involves a few key elements. First, you acknowledge what you did. You take responsibility for your part in the conflict. Second, you express sincere regret for the hurt you caused. And third, you outline a plan for how you're going to do better in the future.
I like that.
So for example, instead of just saying, sorry, I was a jerk, you say something like, I realize I dismissed your feelings earlier. That wasn't fair. I'm going to work on being more attentive in the future.
It shows that you really understand the impact of your actions and that you're committed to making a change. Okay, what else is important for that post-conflict repair?
Physical touch. This is something that's often overlooked, but it can be incredibly powerful.
Yeah, like hugging.
Yeah, exactly. Hugging, holding hands, cuddling, anything that involves physical contact. Studies have shown that physical touch releases oxytocin, which is often called the bonding hormone. It helps to restore that sense of closeness and intimacy that might have been damaged during the argument. Even when words feel difficult, physical touch can be a really powerful way to reconnect.
It's like saying, even though we just had this disagreement, I still love you.
Exactly.
And the last thing our source mentions is lightheartedness. What's the role of that in post-conflict repair?
Humor can be really helpful for diffusing tension and resetting the emotional tone after a serious discussion. So do something fun together, share a laugh, even make a silly joke about something completely unrelated. It helps to lighten the mood and remind you both that you enjoy each other's company.
So to wrap things up, what are the key takeaways you want our listeners to remember from this deep dive into conflict?
The first and most important thing is that conflict in relationships is normal. It's going to happen.
Yeah.
It's not a sign that something is wrong. In fact, learning to navigate conflict effectively can actually be a sign of a healthy relationship. What matters is how you handle it.
And remember those worst mistakes we talked about.
Right.
The silent treatment, name calling, and keeping score, those are the things you really want to avoid.
Absolutely.
Instead, focus on those effective techniques. The 5-to-1 ratio, the 20-minute rule, active listening, and I statements. Those are your tools for fighting well.
And don't forget, sometimes avoiding conflict can be just as damaging as too much conflict. Open communication is key.
And after the argument, remember to repair the connection. Apologize sincerely, use physical touch, and don't be afraid to be a little silly and have some fun together.
The goal isn't to win the argument. The goal is to win as a couple.
So, as you reflect on all of this, think about the balance of conflict and harmony in your own relationships. Are you addressing issues directly? Or are there conversations that you're avoiding? How is your current conflict style impacting your relationships? These are important questions to consider. Thanks for diving deep with us.